I'm not gonna win here, and I'm okay with it. Some of you are really gonna hate this video, and the others, well, you're gonna love it. This is the Founders Edition 5090 from Nvidia, and this GPU is playing tricks on you, but not in the way that you're thinking. And we're gonna tell you all about it right here, right now on Robeytech, after a word from our sponsors. Another innovation from Maingear that I cannot wait to get my hands on is the new Apex Rush. This is a PC that lives at the intersection of artistry and engineering. Featuring RTX 50 series graphics, the Apex Rush is gorgeous and powerful, but it also has some practical features that set it apart. From easily accessible filling and drain ports to multiple customization options and symmetrical cooling runs. The Apex Rush, it takes Maingear's obsession with clean lines, cool components, and sheer simplicity to create one showstopper of a PC, and I cannot wait for you to check it out. But if you want more details right now, check out Apex Rush over on maingear.com today, or check out the link in the description below. This GPU, it's like that optical illusion where some of you are looking at it and you see a young woman like staring off into the distance, while some will just see a sullen old hag. And depending on which side you see, it's easy to say that what the other side is seeing is wrong. But we're gonna pander to both sides, because this is one of those situations where multiple things can be true or have validity to them at the same time. And when we look at the RTX 5090, the data, the makeup of the card, and the $2,000 price tag, this GPU makes very little sense for most gamers, while simultaneously being a really magical piece of engineering and technology. Now, as we dive in, we need to establish some expectations for what this is going to look like. Understand, this is already going to be a longer video, so we're not going to be doing a deep dive comparison between the 4090 and the 5090 or going in depth about the technologies driving this GPU. If you want to know more about those things, you can check out the pre-release video we did already right here, and the number of amazing other TechTubers and influencers that have done a really good job of covering all of this ad nauseum. So let's start with what we are going to talk about first, and that's the raw data we saw from the 5090, because let's be honest, Nvidia made some really bold claims about the 50 series, and it's really worth digging into. Now, we're gonna talk about DLSS 4 and multi-frame generation, doing our best to show examples with the understanding that YouTube compresses the crap out of these videos. But we did capture gameplay videos at super high quality and bit rates for you to take a look at side by side in the program called ICAT, so you can see this all for yourself, and just check down in the description for instructions on how to do that and to see the examples so you can get it in all of its raw glory. We're also gonna lean into that meme that multi-frame generation introduces game-breaking input latency and graphical anomalies, and that you should never use it in any competitive multiplayer game ever. So you know what? We brought in an expert. We brought in a streamer whose bread and butter is competitive gaming, and we're gonna put that to the test. As for the data we are gonna look at, we tested the RTX 4090 and Radeon RX 7900 XTX alongside the RTX 5090 in a gauntlet of 10 games at both 1440p and 4K, with and without the aid of upscaling or frame generation, as well as 1080p RAW, to get a complete set of raw numbers. Now, keep in mind that with all the numbers we're going to show you, data like this is not concrete. The RTX 5090 is running on pre-release drivers on titles that have not been updated or optimized for it. In some cases, these numbers could be better after day one, and in other cases, there is a world where it actually could get worse. This is why reviews like this, they're ongoing. And this is why you should keep looking out for info before spending a stupid amount of money on one of these things. So remember, day one reviews are day one data. We look at the raw performance without the benefit of upscaling or frame generation. The RTX 5090 gave us some mixed results, but they weren't mixed results without patterns. At 1080p, the 5090 had a noticeable lead over the 4090 in half of our tested games, while leading the 7900 XTX in 7 titles. That's right, not in all of them. Here we see games like Hogwarts Legacy and Star Wars Outlaws showing a preference for AMD. Interestingly enough, we saw Call of Duty, which, let's be honest, typically favors AMD, flirting with the RTX 5090, giving it far more love than the XTX. And for the RTX 4090, it nudged the 5090 out of the lead in Cyberpunk, Indiana Jones, Marvel Rivals, and Space Marine 2. But the 5090 takes a significant lead in titles like Black Myth Wukong and Forza Horizon 5. Now the story, it changes ever so slightly at 1440p. Here, we see the 5090 taking a lead over the 4090 in 6 out of the 10 games, while leading the 7900 XTX again in 7 out of 10. That's right, again, not a sweep, 6 out of 10 and 7 out of 10. Now, while we do see some carryover from 1080p, the 5090 took a lead over the 4090 in Starfield and Marvel Rivals while face planting, and I do mean face planting in Star Wars Outlaws. Now, the RTX 5090 couldn't quite catch a break in Cyberpunk or Indiana Jones either. As for the XTX, Hogwarts, Star Wars Outlaws, and Indiana Jones all had better showings than the 5090. And finally, at 4K, the RTX 5090 led the RTX 4090 and RTX 7900 XTX in 7 out of 10 titles. The 4090 held onto its lead in Cyberpunk, Indiana Jones, and Star Wars Outlaws. Overall, you know, the picture doesn't look great for the 5090 if you take these numbers at face value. I mean, come on, it's a $2,000 GPU. Now, we did reach out to Nvidia, and of course we shared this information with them, and they said, you know what, they're not surprised, but it could be because of 5090 power states, which is new, or games not being finally optimized for game-ready drivers. Again, you have to take this with a grain of salt, but we're aware of what Nvidia is saying, and we can only publish what we actually saw in testing. But Robey, some of you might be saying, surely DLSS and FrameGen can save the 5090's reputation, right? Well, we did see some uplift in some places, but it's kind of all over the map, and we're showing you that right now. What isn't all over the map, though, is the extra amount of power it takes to actually drive an RTX 5090. When we compare the average wattage between the 4090 and 5090, the 5090 drew an average of 348 watts, while the 4090 drew an average of just over 271 watts. For context, that's around a 76 watt difference, which means if you're using anything less than a 1000 watt PSU, you're in trouble. And that doesn't even account for overclock cards yet. Now, as for heat, the 5090 averaged around 56 degrees Celsius on our open air test bench versus the 4090's 53 degrees during our gaming benchmarks. As for noise level, we saw an average of around 51 decibels under load. So when we look at the numbers, they tell a story, a bit of an unfavorable story in a lot of ways, but they don't tell the whole story. We tested some titles that have clear preferences on different sides of the GPU aisle, whether that's Nvidia, AMD, or Intel. Now, we also tried to choose a fair mix for our tests to keep things in balance. There were places, though, that the 5090 was just wearing the wrong colors, and others where it defied preferences altogether, for better or for worse. Now, see, the bottom line is that all of this data is like a cliffhanger episode, and we're gonna have to wait till next week after the official launch, where these numbers are all gonna change, especially considering that 70 plus games that are gonna be supporting all the 5090's bells and whistles and DLSS 4 are all coming out on day one. To be clear, I'm not trying to defend the RTX 5090. It looks really rough and raw performance. However, the 5090, it shares the same story with any of the other hardware we've tested or is reviewed on day one, whether that's 9000 series CPUs or whatever. All of this is info to help give you context so you can see the whole story. Now, speaking of the whole story, let's get back to that original illustration because we have that young lass that's waiting for us to talk about her, and it would be really rude for us to keep her waiting. It's hard to encapsulate what we saw and experienced with DLSS 4, multi-frame generation, and all of the other bells and whistles that came with DLSS 4. I think the term pure freaking magic was thrown around while testing at least 7 or 8 times. Now, we're gonna talk about this in isolation from our raw data because the titles we tested multi-frame generation in either had beta implementations outside of the retail branches we tested for raw data, or they were able to leverage Nvidia's new DLSS override on the driver level. So what we're about to share is not really a one-to-one comparison. And because that's the case, we wanted to see what happened when we turned everything on. We're talking about path tracing, ray reconstruction, DLSS transformer, the highest possible texture settings at 4K. If it had an ultimate setting, we turned it on. So in Alan Wake 2, we saw about 222 frames per second after turning everything on. In Cyberpunk 2077, about 286 FPS. In Dragon Age Veilguard, we saw 342 frames per second. Hogwarts Legacy averaged 197. In Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, we saw an average of 182 frames per second. Marvel Rivals was without a rival at 390 frames per second. And finally, we saw Star Wars Outlaws averaging 232 frames per second. But numbers like that don't mean a thing if the image quality is as attractive as drinking a lukewarm glass of hot dog water. Gross. Which unfortunately, we've seen some upscaling and frame generation implementations that are like taking a big swig of liquid glizzy. But what we experienced, that was not the case here. Now, we're gonna try to show you some side-by-side comparisons captured here, but understand two things. Our capture was limited to 120 frames per second, and between editing and YouTube compressions, this is going to look a whole lot different than the experience itself. We mentioned this in the intro, but if you want to download those videos and see them side by side, you can basically check down in the description below for all of the information on how to do that. Seeing multi-frame generation in person, especially with all of the bells and whistles at the same time, is a lot like experiencing an OLED display when you've been using LCDs your entire life. It will literally ruin you on experiencing your games any other way. And I'm not exaggerating. Understand, we spent an entire day after our testing just experiencing what the RTX 5090 can do in gaming. We played Alan Wake 2, Star Wars Outlaws, Dragon Age, Marvel Rivals, and more. We spent literally hours and hours just saying, is the game experience awesome? And that was with the team huddled around the monitor. And without fail, on top of just having probably one of the best gaming experiences we've ever had, we saw buttery smooth frame rates with ridiculously low response time, with rich quality of detail that was just unreal at 4K. And it is better than what we could get with pure rasterization right now. But some of you out there might be yelling at the screen right now, Robey, what about input latency? Who cares how good it looks if your input signal is slower than molasses? Everyone knows you can't even use this in multiplayer, and that's where you need the most frames. Well, we thought the same thing too. I mean, this is the argument we hear every time frame generation comes up. And since we're not competitive gamers, and yes, apparently Hearthstone doesn't count, we phoned a friend. And so Coven is a Marvel Rivals streamer that you can check out over at twitch.tv/Coven. This guy knows the game inside and out. I mean, he plays it for like 10 hours a day since it's released, and you can check him out and verify that on Twitch right now. So if anyone was going to be able to tell us if multi-frame generation was going to negatively impact competitive gaming, it was him. He was kind enough to come over to the studio, sit down at our test rig for about 4 or 5 hours, and share his thoughts with us. Also, we didn't want any of you to have to watch our sorry gameplay here. So how did this work? Well, we had him play on the RX 7900 XTX with no frame generation or FSR to warm up. And after a few matches, and he was warmed up and we made sure that his rig felt just like the one at home, we swapped the GPU to the RTX 5090 and we had him play 1080p with multi-frame generation. And then after that, we had a little fun and cranked it up to 4K and see how the whole experience was. But we'll let him tell you about the experience in his own words.
So when I was playing on frame gen on my 4080, the big thing I would notice is if I'm trying to track a target, you know, like if I'm playing a shooter character or I'm playing Storm and I'm trying to track a target, anytime I would like whip my mouse, it would be a plummet of 100 frames. And that's noticeable on the 4080 because the frame gen is only giving me like 300 plus frames. And so you're plummeting down to like sub 200. But then when I was playing on the 5090, I'm pulling 600 frames, and that's like crazy. So like when you're pulling 600 frames and then you drop frames, you're not gonna notice because I'm dropping to 500 frames now. And it was just like an astronomical difference for me because I was like, oh, look at this, I'm whipping, I'm not missing anything. You know, like the game's not stuttering. And that could be the difference. Oh yeah, anytime I like look in video settings and I'm like, oh, let me turn on frame gen. Everyone in chat loses their mind, especially all the actually, like all those people, like they lose their mind whenever I'm like turning on frame gen because of input delay. So like when I turned on frame gen, I didn't notice any input delay. And I mean, you saw me, I was tracking my shots as Punisher, I wasn't missing, I was sniping Iron Man out of the sky as a Mantis. And so like, those are pivotal moments that you need like when the game's on the line. And I didn't notice any input delay. Like the gameplay itself just felt like smoother. It felt like easier to track, you know, like my enemies. I think I need more games to really like notice because like that's a very detailed like thing you're trying to like look for. With a game like Marvel Rivals, since like that's the game we're focusing on right now, like you definitely want a specific set of conditions to happen in the game for you to really see the difference in frames. For me, like what I would notice the most is like an intense ranked mode, right? Where it's neck and neck, everybody's on the payload, and you have every ultimate in the world, like all 6 ultimates popping at once, and you're fighting for your life. I think that would be a pivotal moment right there, okay, to notice like between true frames. Okay. But I mean, what I've noticed so far is just the game feels smoother.
Basically, After hanging out with Covent for that entire time, we walked away from this experience with some answers. No, multi-frame generation did not have a negative impact on his gaming. In fact, he very much enjoyed it, and there was no perceivable input lag, and he was able to pwn folks without any problem whatsoever. But the one thing that we did realize that in order for us to get a more complete picture of multi-frame generation and competitive multiplayer, it's gonna take some more time. As cool as that experience was, what we learned is, what is it gonna be like if we give him a ton of time with this card? So you'll be seeing more of Covent very soon here on the channel, and if that video is ready, it'll be right here, but if not, it's still coming. Or you can head on over to twitch.tv/Covent, give him a follow, and watch how it goes when he does the experiment live over the next few weeks. Okay, so we have to wrap this up here and give you some closing thoughts and some considerations here. The RTX 5090, as we're seeing it right now, is incredible in terms of the technology it brings to the table if you're able to or want to leverage that technology. And there is a ton of technology to leverage with this GPU's 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 VRAM, its massive amount of CUDA cores, expanded memory bus, and so much more. And with that in mind, honestly, this GPU does not make sense for everyone. Did you hear me? It does not make sense for everyone. But then again, it's a lot like the RTX 4090 in that respect. And there are gamers who are absolutely going to get one because they gotta have the best of the best to have that highly performant GPU in their machine because it's a flex. But that percentage, I imagine, is going to be pretty low with the cost of this thing being where it stands today. And that doesn't even account for GPUs that will release above MSRP. Now, as for the small percentage of you that this GPU does make sense for, PC gamer who leverages their GPU for tasks outside of gaming and more specifically AI, this thing could be a literal game changer. But we don't have a complete enough picture to say one way or the other. We'll know more as we start to see other 50 series GPUs release, as we start to see games optimized for them, and when we see what AMD actually releases with their 9000 series in March. We know that there is going to be a group of you that are absolutely hung up on the raw performance numbers and that you want nothing more than pure rasterization. In fact, you probably got a ton of glee from the beginning of this video. And if that's you and that's how you enjoy gaming, you know what? That is perfectly valid and we are totally okay with that. Or, you know what? Maybe you're one of those people who's just sensitive to how DLSS was impacting visuals in the past. And if that's you, you know what, honestly, I would just say you really owe it to yourself to check out how it's improved because that may not be a problem anymore. But let me just say, if you're just straight up angry at this whole thing, I don't know how to make you less angry about this GPU or the technologies that are sweeping the gaming industry. Maybe what we're seeing with multi-frame generation will soften your perspective on DLSS and the other implementations and technologies coming with DLSS 4. But from the way we see it, the gaming industry is headed in a direction that's leveraging AI on the hardware level to improve gaming performance. And technology like DLSS multi-frame generation, transform, path tracing, all that sort of stuff is all pushing the game experience about 10 years ahead of where we would be with pure rasterization today. And even more so, with Nvidia claiming that more than 80% of RTX users are turning on DLSS for supported games, I'm kind of sorry, this is the way that we're seeing technology and game development moving. Heck, even Intel with XeSS and AMD with FSR are moving in this direction too. This is everybody. However, if you're like the majority of the Robeytech team and you love cinematic gaming and dare I say multiplayer gaming with high quality textures and frame rates, you probably don't care from whence the frames flow, only that they flow as beautifully and freely as they did in our testing. And if that's you, you're in for a visual treat and you have a lot to be excited about with DLSS 4 multi-frame generation, DLSS transformer, and all of the other amazing features that the 5090 can offer. Now that wraps this one up, but this will not be the last that you'll see of RTX 5090 or RTX 50 series family coverage here on Robeytech. Again, I want to say thank you to Nvidia for giving us an opportunity to check out the RTX 5090, and a huge thanks to Covent for coming out here and experimenting with us to see if frame generation and competitive gaming can be a marriage made in heaven. So those were our thoughts, but we want to know what you think down in the comments below. Number one, what do you think of the pure rasterization performance? Did it make you angry? Or were you more excited about the new features that are coming out with DLSS 4, like multi-frame gen and all that sort of stuff, and what that means for gaming? And lastly, are you willing to try multi-frame gen in multiplayer? Love to know down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we post a video like this or more 50 series content in the future. And also, if you want to continue the conversation, maybe you want to ask other questions or talk about what kind of builds and stuff that you could put a 50 series card in, head over to our Discord server, discord.gg/Robeytech, amazing place to talk to other tech and PC enthusiasts about these very same things. And you know what? You might just make a friend. Also, make sure you follow us on all the other socials at Robeytech, absolutely everywhere. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.